Welcome, everyone. This is our Tuesday, June 14th, 2022 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. And we are going to start, I'm glad to say once again, with a poetry reading by our poet laureate, Fred Joyner. Welcome, Fred.
Good evening. I'm always thankful for another opportunity. I'm going to read from a selection of meditations by Howard Thurman. If you don't know him, he's the theologian that informed a lot of Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin and all of these other great thinkers and activists. I just wanted to say one moment is that when I took this position as poet laureate to do this, I took it as a because I think that to have a centering moment at the beginning of these meetings is important. It wasn't to be a polemic. It wasn't to be oppositional. It was truly to provide what I think is a centering moment, a moment of respite and peace as we consider the work that we do and the very important work that you all do in Carrboro. And so with that, this piece is called The Binding Unity. It's a prose piece. It's not a poem. And so if you would indulge me for a second. The Binding Unity. There is unity that binds all living things into a single whole. The unity is sensed in many ways, sometimes when walking alone in the woods, far off from all the traffic makes up the daily experience. The stillness in the mind, nothing stirs. The imprisoned self seems to slip outside its boundaries, and the ebb and flow of life is keenly felt. One becomes indistinguishable part of a single rhythm, a single pulse. Sometimes there's a moment of complete and utter identity with the pain of a loved one. All the intensity and anguish are felt. One enters through a single door of suffering into the misery of the whole of the human race, with no margin left to mark the place which was one's own. What is felt belongs nowhere, but is everywhere, binding and holding in a tight circle of agony until all of life is gathered into a single timeless grasp. There are other moments when one becomes aware of the thrust of a tingling joy that rises deep within until it bursts forth in radiating happiness that bathes all of life in its glory and warmth. Pain, sorrow, grief are seen as joy becoming, and life gives a vote of confidence to itself, defining its meaning with a sureness that shatters every doubt concerning the broad, free purpose of its goodness. There are times of personal encounter when a knowledge of caring binds two together, of what is felt is good. There is nothing new nor old, or only the knowledge that what comes as the flooding insight of love binds all living things into a single whole. The felt reverence spreads and deepens until to live and to love are to do one thing. To hate is to desire the non-existence of the object of hate. To love is the act of adoration and praise with the creator of life as the be-all and end-all of everything that is. And yet, there's always remains the hard core of the self, blending and withdrawing, giving and pulling back, accepting and rejoicing, yielding and unyielding. What may this be but the pulsing of the unity that binds all living things in a single whole, the God of life extending herself in the manifold glories of her creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. I'm going to share a proclamation, and I've asked a special guest to join us tonight, and that is Kendall Lytle, who's here. And Kendall, will you join me at the podium, please? So I think many of us know Kendall already very well. Been involved for a while in town things. Kendall just graduated actually from Middle College High School at Durham Tech. Congratulations. And, not only earned her high school diploma, but also an associate in arts degree, because as you know, students at Middle College High have access to college level coursework. And so Kendall took advantage of that, and congratulate you for that. Kendall is also going to be attending Elon University in the fall. So we're especially fortunate to have had Kendall be involved in so many goings-on around this community for a long time, including serving for 3 of her 4 years in high school on the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board, currently still serving as president of the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP's Youth Council, and also was, I believe, youth advisor to our Racial Equity Commission. So we're going to miss you when you move out to Elon, but we know you'll be back. I asked Kendall here because I'm going to read a proclamation regarding Juneteenth, which is the holiday weekend we have coming up, and Kendall's been very involved in planning a community celebration for that event. So whereas Juneteenth is the oldest national commemoration of the emancipation of enslaved African Americans in the United States, and whereas on August 23, 2007, North Carolina General Assembly approved an act recognizing Juneteenth National Freedom Day in North Carolina, but has not designated Juneteenth as an official state holiday. And whereas on July 14, 2020, the Carrboro Town Council adopted a resolution designating Juneteenth as an official paid holiday for town employees, and urging state and federal legislators to sponsor legislation making Juneteenth an official state and federal holiday. And whereas on June 17, 2021, just last year, the United States Congress approved the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act. I'm sure they did that because we encouraged them to. And President Biden signed the bill the following day, making Juneteenth National Independence Day a federal holiday. And whereas a Chapel Hill Carrboro Juneteenth celebration is being planned by the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP, the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP Youth Council, the Marion Cheek Jackson Center for Saving and Making History, the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools Office of Equity and Engagement, the Rogers Eubanks Neighborhood Association, and the towns of Carrboro and Chapel Hill. Now therefore I, Damon Siles, Mayor of the town of Carrboro, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim Sunday, June 19th, 2022, to be a date for the celebration of Juneteenth National Independence Day in Carrboro. I encourage all residents to learn more about the history of Juneteenth and to attend the Chapel Hill Carrboro Juneteenth celebration on Sunday between 2 and 6 p.m. at the Hargraves Community Center in Chapel Hill. This the 14th day of June, 2022. So June. And since Kendall has been central to the planning of the event this weekend, I asked Kendall to come share some information with us about it.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Damon. You basically said everything I was going to say, but I'll just say it again. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kendall Lytle, and I am the president of the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP Youth Council. Last year, the Youth Council held the very first Juneteenth celebration in our community at Carrboro Town Commons. Because the event was so successful, we have the amazing opportunity this year to work with and host a new event with other organizations throughout Chapel Hill and Carrboro to make this year's Juneteenth celebration bigger and better. This year, we collaborated with the town of Carrboro, the town of Chapel Hill, the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP, Empowerment Inc., the Rogers Eubanks Neighborhood Association, also known as RENA, Marianne Cheek Jackson Center for Saving and Making History, and the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools Office of Equity and Engagement. Over the past couple months, this team has found Black-owned businesses, entertainment, and activities dedicated to making this year's community celebration event a huge success. We will have food trucks, small business vendors, nonprofits, fun activities for kids and families, and so much more. So we hope that you all will join us on June 19th from 2 to 6 p.m. at Hargraves Community Center. Thank you.
Thanks, Kendall.
Thank you.
Also want to appreciate Fred again for that, as he called it, a centering moment for us to start off the meeting. I think as those of you who attend our meetings or watch our meetings from home know, we've had some difficult meetings over the past few weeks. And that is something that we have committed to each other that we're going to work on. One of the things that we'll be doing is scheduling a retreat with the help of the manager toward the end of our summer recess to talk about some of these issues around governance and how we use our time together in meetings, and how we work effectively with the manager and his staff as a council. So I'm looking forward to more work on that, and want everyone who's listening tonight and here tonight to know that we have all talked with each other and committed to doing that work. So thank you. Right, next on the agenda, Mr. Manager, is announcement of upcoming meetings. I guess, Mr. Clerk, that's for you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Have quite a few meetings to announce tonight. I'll start with tomorrow, June 15th. We have several, and I'll just read them off here. First up, we have the Economic Sustainability Commission meeting at 6 p.m. That will be held here at Town Hall. Also, tomorrow we have a Board of Adjustment meeting at 7 p.m., which is also here at Town Hall. Human Services Advisory Commission will also be tomorrow, 6:30 p.m., and that will be virtual. Affordable Housing Advisory Commission tomorrow, 7 p.m. And then on June 16th, we have the Climate Action Team meeting at 7 p.m., and that was virtual. Also on the 16th, the Planning Board meeting at 7:30 p.m., and that is virtual. And finally, the Transportation Advisory Board, also on June 16th at 7:30, and that one is virtual. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Wesley. I'll just mention that tomorrow morning there's a meeting of the advisory board for the Orange County Visitors Bureau. And then also the next morning, the Thursday morning, is a meeting of the board of the chamber. Any other meetings coming up that we need to know about, folks? Not seeing any. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The first item on the consent agenda is the approval of minutes from the March 15, 2022 meeting. The next item is approval of the FY 2022-2023 Home Investment Partnerships Program Annual Action Plan. The purpose of this agenda item is for the Town Council to consider approving Home Investment Partnerships Programs Annual Action Plan activities for FY 22 through 23. The next item is authorization to execute a revised memorandum of understanding for the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. The purpose of this agenda item is to authorize the mayor to execute a revised memorandum of understanding for the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. The next item is transportation project updates. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the Town Council with a status report on a number of local transportation projects that are underway. The next item is a request to issue a street closing permit for the Latin American Festival. And the purpose of the agenda item is to consider a street closing permit application. And the last item is a resolution amending the timeline and structure of the Community Safety Task Force. And the purpose of this agenda item is to amend the timeline and the structure.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I would like to suggest that we pull item number 3, which is the revised memorandum of understanding for the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness, for some discussion about some changes that we've recently heard about from Town of Chapel Hill's Council as well as Hillsboro's Town Board. Any other items to pull?
Number 4.
Number 4, the transportation projects. Okay. Entertain a motion to approve items 1, 2, 5, and 6.
So moved.
Okay. Moved, I believe, by Eleazar, seconded by Randy. We approve items 1, 2, 5, and 6. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The matter passes unanimously. Mr. Manager, item number 3, which is the request to authorize the mayor to execute a revised MOU for the Partnership to End Homelessness. My understanding is that, and this piece was included in our packet, that the town of Chapel Hill had proposed some slightly alternate language, basically amending it to a 1-year timeline so that there's some time for further discussion about the longer term MOU. I learned earlier today that Hillsboro's town board accepted Chapel Hill's proposed language. So that's what's, I think, I wanted to raise with folks is that the MOU that Hillsboro has adopted and that I assume Chapel Hill Town Council either has or intends to approve is not quite the same one as is in our packet. It's the one that's been modified by the language that Chapel Hill submitted, which is also in our packet. So I guess what I'd suggest is, unless there's further discussion, maybe a motion to approve the resolution in the packet, but with the proposed language from Chapel Hill, if that makes sense. Any questions? Susan?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just one clarifying question. So Hillsboro, as far as we know, approved exactly the MOU that appears in attachment B, but with the language, the Chapel Hill changes in attachment E. And then it's our understanding that Chapel Hill plans to do that same thing tomorrow.
Well, I can't speak for what Chapel Hill will do, but my understanding is that, yeah, that the Hillsboro Town Board supported Chapel Hill's proposed language. So
Okay.
I'm assuming since Chapel Hill proposed that language, that that's what they would like to do. Sammy?
Do we know why they are choosing to change the time?
I believe it's because they want us as the local governments, the partners in the partnership, to have some time for additional discussion about a longer term agreement or a longer term MOU.
Okay,
But
beyond
Mr.
2
Manager
years.
may have some more information about that.
No, that's correct. In the original MOU, it showed 2 years, but they changed to 1 year, just to show that it's a 1 year commitment with a commitment to have additional dialogue.
Okay. Any other questions or a motion?
I'll move. Move to approve with the amendments and
And moved by Eleazar, seconded by Danny, that we approve the resolution in the packet, but amending that resolution with the language proposed by Chapel Hill. In attachment, Susan, you said E, is that right?
Correct.
All right, any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Okay, Sammy, you had item number 4.
Yeah, I read in the summary of transportation projects that for South Greensboro Street, there is an agreement with NCDOT, or NCOD DOT approved of a reduction of the speed limit on the road. And that further reduction would require a little more study. So my interest is in perhaps doing the lowered speed limit now as soon as we can, and until we get that other study done to lower even further. So I'd like to make a motion to accept this report, but with a request to staff to lower it per what NCODOT already allows.
Mr. Manager, any questions about Sammy's motion?
No, we'll reach out to NCDOT and see if we can move forward.
Right, is
Thank you.
there so there's a motion on the table. Is there a second? Sammy, as I understand it, your motion is to approve the item in the packet with the addition that we request staff to talk to NCDOT about lowering that limit right away,
Right.
preliminary to the study that they've proposed.
Second it.
Moved by Sammy, seconded by Randy, that we approve this item as amended by Sammy. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please say no. All right. Matter passes unanimously. All right. Okay, great. So next up, Mr. Manager, other matters.
Sure, just a moment.
And I think Mr. Manager might be pinch hitting tonight for
Yes,
Rebecca, is that
I think
right?
double duty tonight, yes. So the next item is a work session for the FY23 budget discussion. And this is to allow the town council to discuss some additional items regarding the FY23 budget request. And I'm going to do the presentation. Rebecca Buzzard, our Housing and Community Services Director, is not feeling well this evening, so I'm going to pitch it and see if I can do the presentation on her behalf.
Mr. Manager, the slides that you left for us in paper copy, are those the same as what we're about to see here, pretty much? Okay.
Oops. And let me know if it's hard to hear in my mask. I'm going to leave it on, but if it gets challenging, we will take it off. I'm not clear enough for you. Okay. So tonight we're presenting a work session on the FY23 budget. And I'm going to start the presentation and then turn it over to Laura Janway, our Environmental Sustainability Coordinator, at the end of the presentation. This is just a reminder of the budget timeline. We've had our community input. I presented the recommended budget. We had a public hearing last week, and tonight we're conducting a work session, and the budget is scheduled for adoption next Tuesday, June 21st. Here are the 4 topics for your consideration tonight. The first one is to summarize and clarify the June 7th decision to fulfill the IFC funding request for shelters, to discuss the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness request for expanded funding, to discuss the additional funding of a half-cent for affordable housing, and to provide an update on the climate action plan. On the first topic, I want to just revisit your decision last week to fund the shelters in the IFC request and put that in the FY23 budget. That for the town would come to $92,950, and it would be a 1-year commitment. And I want to point out here that last week we talked about another number, which is $97,000. That number was based on the 2010 census. This number is based on the 2020 census, and that's the same census data that the other jurisdictions are using as well. So that makes us consistent with them by using this number. And then with your direction, I would develop an agreement for this funding for the 1 year, including a scope of service with IFC. And then beyond that, work with our partners on an ILA for future funding. The next item is the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. The continuation request, which is already in the FY23 budget as a recommendation, is for $34,733, and that's funded through the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, and that covers the 2.65 positions. The expansion request is for $95,243, and that's not in the FY23 budget, and that's the purpose for this work session tonight, to discuss that request. And that amount will be in addition to the continuation funding, so it would be a total of $129,976, which would be the town's portion to fund this request from the Partnership to End Homelessness. And this would support an additional 6.5 positions. With the partnership, here are the 3 options based on the expansion request. There are 3 choices here. One is to fund the Rapid Rehousing Program. That provides financial assistance and case management. It will be for 1 continuing position. The total cost for that would be the $263,937. That would be among all the partners. Carrboro's portion of that is $37,743. And I apologize for all the numbers, so just bear with me as I lay all this out for you. The next choice would be SORAD, and that is a program that connects unsheltered individuals with services and housing. That will be for 4 continuing positions, and the total cost among all the partners is $307,493. And the town's portion of that would be $43,971. And the third choice is to fund the Housing Accessibility Coordinator housing locator request. That helps with keeping and searching for housing. That would fund 1.5 continuing positions, and the total cost across partners is $94,603. And the town's portion of that would be the $13,528. And that totals of $95,243 I showed you here. Chapel Hill has agreed to move forward to fund the SORAD portion of this request, and so we just pointed out here of what the SORAD request, give you a little more information about what they're looking for here. The program cost of that is $33,000. Personnel cost is over $274,000. That would fund 3 navigators and 1 clinical coordinator. And just want to point out that they also receive in-kind rent for the office and Wi-Fi that is donated by the Downtown Partnership. And just list some of the accomplishments here since they started in 2020. There have been 280 persons served. 85 individuals have entered permanent destinations, 34 with the housing choice vouchers. 72 have entered transitional housing and shelter. Over 210 have obtained funded services, which include supplies, food, transportation. And there have been over 125 law enforcement deflections, meaning they've supported our law enforcement agencies. Just some additional information on the Rapid Rehousing and Housing Stability Coordinating the Housing Locator request. The personnel cost here is $67,000. The program cost is $196,000, and that's for financial assistance for rent, utilities, deposit, and moving costs. Under the homeless prevention and housing stability, that will fund one full-time equivalent. The personnel cost there is $67,000. No programmatic funding is involved. And the housing locator is a half-time position at $27,000 and no programmatic funding there. And the rapid rehousing would be one full-time equivalent as well. Through these programs, there are now over 180 households who are actively connected with the service provider and are looking for housing. And so before I move on to the additional half-cent on our housing tax, I just want to point out in terms of options to fund the IFC and the partnership request. At this point, I recommend that we use fund balance to do that. This will be a one-time contribution, which is what we want to do with fund balance until we decide what a longer-term solution may be in terms of the town's funding for those programs and services. So there'll be a recommendation on the IFC and for the partnership request. Moving on to the half-cent property tax. In the FY23 budget, we have projected that a half-cent would generate $129,355. And in the FY23 budget, the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, it's already included $380,230. That's what we project that the fund, the 1.5 cents will raise in FY23. That's already in the budget. An option for increasing the additional revenue here to get us up to 2 cents. There are two choices that I have suggested here. One is to just raise the tax to 2 cents, to go ahead and raise the tax for the additional half cent. Or the other would be to use ARPA funding. And here again, this would be a one-time contribution until you all as council decide where you want to go long-term with affordable housing. But this will, at least in the next fiscal year, raise that 1.5 cents up to 2 pennies. And so I'll pause there and turn over to council for discussion, and then we'll come back and do the climate action plan.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was helpful to see all in one place. So council members, work session is an opportunity for us to ask questions about what the managers presented, talk with each other about our thinking. I think manager also mentioned the route that Chapel Hill has taken, which is to support that first year of the IFC request, as we discussed in our last meeting, as well as to support the SORAD or street outreach portion of the Portland County Partnership request. And Mr. Manager, you're recommending that if we did do that, that we would just use our fund balance. In other words, dip into the reserves to fund that for this first year.
Yes.
And that would buy us some time to have additional conversation with our partners about how to do a more long-term commitment. Is that right? All right, so questions for Richard or for each other about how we want to proceed here?
I have a process
Andy?
question. Are we going to discuss each separately? That way,
Sure, I think
I just want to keep things clear.
I think we can. I think, yeah, we can go whichever way you like. If we want to start with the IFC commitment, we can do that. I think one thing we'll also want to hear from the manager at some point during this discussion is what it is exactly you need from us tonight as a council in terms of guidance or direction. I'm assuming normally in a work session we wouldn't take formal action, but we would offer you where we're inclined to go in terms of your recommendation, and then you would come back with the final budget next week for adoption.
Yes, that's correct.
Great. So Randy, do you want to start with a question about, maybe we start with the IFC request? Is that okay with everyone? Okay.
Well, I guess one of the things I'd like to make clear, and I guess, Mr. Manager, if you want to make clear where things stand as a result of a resolution from last week, so folks in the public understand exactly where we are regarding IFC funding. In other words, what was agreed to last week ahead of the work session.
So that's what this slide shows, that you all approved the FY23 funding for the shelters at $92,950, which is using the 2020 census data. And that'd be a one-year commitment. And then I would develop a agreement with the IFC for this funding that includes a scope of work to identify how those funds will be used. And then that would also give me an opportunity with your direction to work with our partners to work on an interlocal agreement for future funding.
I just want to say that for folks in the community that were expecting to have the discussion tonight as part of a work session, and and did not expect the resolution last week, know that we're parallel with Chapel Hill, and that it's very difficult to look at a service as IFC and not feel and be thinking with our care over what we know is important to consider in terms of finances. And I say this because had we not done the resolution last week, we probably would have had a more robust discussion, which now we really will have to have at a later point. It's important not because of IFC. I don't think any of us would have changed our view, but it's important because we need to really think through, what is the role of the municipalities regarding all of the many services, the human relations and human services for the county. So I look forward, Mr. Manager, for us to have a robust discussion, not only amongst ourselves, but with county regarding funding. We know it's not sustainable for the IFC right now, but we also know that the course that we're on is not sustainable for the town. And our responsibility in our roles is to, of course, ensure the sustainability for the budget for the entire town and all of the services that are so critical for all of the different kinds of the diverse services that we have, and we look forward to having in the future. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Susan?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Randy, for those comments. I had I'll start us off with, I have a couple questions just to a little bit of clarification. So, Mr. Manager, on the $92,950, I know that IFC, with this request, IFC would actually move itself out of the outside agency human services process that they've gone through in the past. Where would this appear in the budget? Would this be now in the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund for the?
Yes, that seems to be a reasonable place to put it. I'm seeing our finance director nod his head. Yes, that's where we put this.
Okay.
And Susan, let me just jump in.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to clarify that I believe that IFC, this request from IFC is to help support their shelter services. But they would probably still be hoping to apply for funding through our outside agency grants making process to support some of the other things they've been getting support for over the years from that.
Yes, they have an application in through that process as well. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Yeah, my understanding from reading the memo was that the food security request would still go through the outside agency. The other question, Mr. Manager, is I really appreciate all of the information that you shared in terms of this payment in lieu, and I don't mean to be making this so complicated. I think I am making it complicated, but it was really helpful. So it's not that you need to go here, but I'm looking at page 134 in the budget, and what it's showing that for payment in lieu for 2021, there was $82,000. And I'm not seeing any for the adopted budget in 21-22 or for this recommended budget. So I'm asking this question just because I'm wondering, I wonder if we would have access to more revenue than's actually appearing here. Are we not seeing payment in lieu for the recommended budget because we just don't know how much will be available this year, so it's better just to not put anything at all there, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what you shared with me earlier today.
So when we get the payment in lieu funds, we do record that, but we don't get it every year. And so that's why you don't see it reflected here, and we don't know what's coming in the next fiscal year, so it's hard to budget for that, not knowing if we'll get any. So that's why I don't see any budget. We just don't know what FY '23 will bring us. But if we do get it, it will be allocated as payment in lieu in that line item.
And do we have with the fiscal year almost being over, do we have sort of a rough estimate of payment in lieu for this year?
I'm not certain if we've received any, but I can confirm that.
Oh.
I'm seeing finance say we haven't received any this year.
Wow. Okay. So when I saw the 82,000, I was thinking, oh, great. Maybe we could expect something along that line for this year. But what you're saying is we have no idea, and it could be zero again.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That helps. So that's good for now, but I will have will we be able to do sort of a round robin kind of thing? We can,
I think so.
okay.
Yeah. Sounds like I think we have some questions about kind of focusing on the IFC request for now, and maybe we stick there until people have their questions answered. So we'll go to Sammy next.
So yeah, I think one thing I would be interested in understanding a little better about the IFC shelters is what it is specifically that the users of the shelters need in terms of access to the shelter and those kinds of things. I think it is an opportunity to talk with our other jurisdictions in terms of how we can better serve the people who are served by the IFC. So, Mr. Manager, when we have that conversation lead up to the MOU, if you could kind of gather the history of what the IFC has had to agree with, for example, with Chapel Hill in terms of where they are currently located, what restrictions may exist there, for example, and other information like that, so that we can have a thoroughly vetted conversation with our neighboring jurisdictions. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. Randy?
I'm glad, Susan, that you pointed out page 134. And Mr. Manager, I would just ask on page 134, since this just has to do with the way it's laid out, and it's the Affordable Housing Fund page, but there's several items under expenditures that are not affordable housing, and I'm just wondering if we should broaden that category to include something in the title that has to do with emergency services and affordability, because there are home repairs as part of that, as well as partnership and homelessness. I just think it helps community to understand how broad a category of affordable housing is and what we're thinking is included in that. That would just be my recommendation.
Thank you, Randy. Let me make sure that we don't have any other hands before you go again, Susan. Okay, Susan?
I appreciate that point, Randy, and I just wanted to follow up on that. I know that Chapel Hill decided to fund just for 1 year, and then take look a little bit more about what we're going to be doing together down the road. And I just wanted to throw this idea out there, Mr. Manager. We've spoken about this. Barbara, I think we've spoken about it as well, but the idea would be to have basically for a year, do a countywide study. And this would be both the emergency housing services and affordable housing, kind of looking at what we're doing here, as well as perhaps what we're doing and what other communities are doing around this. I was thinking that maybe the Housing Collaborative could sort of take the lead on this, because this group is comprised of the electeds and staff from each of the townships and also Orange County. And I was also wondering about each of the jurisdictions using ARPA funding to pay for a facilitator to help with this year-long study. But the study can be looking at everything from the formula. Is this the formula that we want to continue? Maybe the county takes even a bigger lead in terms of the funding, which is, I know, I think it was at College Park. I think the county share was actually 85%. I'm not necessarily saying that's what we do here, but it was a significantly bigger portion was taken on by the county. We could be looking at this whole issue of double taxation. If you live in Carrboro, you're actually paying a double tax in order to provide these emergency housing shelters, and we all obviously prioritize this and think this is hugely important that we all have access, but it is still raised this question about double taxation. It would give us time to look at should Mebane be brought into this formula, that part of Mebane that's in Orange County. It would give us time to look at the Orange County Diversion Facility, which I think is scheduled to start construction next year. But to what extent, maybe that will take at least a little bit of the pressure off IFC. You know, we won't know for a little bit of time. But my idea would be to have this year-long study and use that study to help inform an interlocal agreement moving forward at that point. So I just wanted to throw that idea out.
Thank you, Susan. Barbara?
I first want to speak on this particular work session that we're in and how close it is to the date that we actually have to, or schedule to approve the budget. I think it's too close, and I think we need to try to be better about scheduling that next year. It's just, for me, it's just scheduled too close. I felt I heard some of that coming from Randy's comments as far as, just having room to digest and, think about, discuss. Right now, I just feel like we're somewhat backed into a corner and we got to move, which we actually do if we're going to approve the budget next week. So I just wanted to say that. I also wanted to remind us that this request from IFC for the interlocal agreement came March, maybe. So we've had some time. I mean, we just read it and we kind of, I don't know what we did. We didn't talk about it. So it's not like it just showed up. Mr. White, $92,950 for the first year. I need to mention the amount for the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness, which is $129,976 if we fund the continuation as well as the expansion. This is Carrboro's portion. So am I correct in understanding that all of this money is coming out of the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund? Is that
No,
correct?
I propose that we take out a fund balance since it's just a 1 year.
IFC out of the fund balance?
Both IFC and Orange County Partnership, since it is a
Okay.
one-time appropriation at this point,
Okay.
until we figure out the long-term solution. Or
Okay, and so the $34,733, which
that's already in the FY23
that's already in there
recommended
for
budget.
that.
Yes.
Okay, so you're talking about the 95,000.
Yes.
And so, thank you. And so I appreciate the information on the current ILAs and the MOUs. I do want to say, for transparency, the Community Home Trust, to my understanding, voted for elected officials not to be on their board anymore. I understand that there was a statute. Brady, you may know about that statute that came in January of this year.
Yes.
Do you want to just mention that real quickly, if you don't mind?
Yeah, it's a new statute that came out that basically said if you're on a board of a nonprofit, then you cannot vote on appropriations of money or contract. Right now, since the statute's really new, it's a little bit unclear. I read the statute that it just pertains to contracts, but I think what the UNC School of Government is opined, and just to err on the side of caution, budget appropriations for those nonprofits, if you're on the board, then you may be conflicted out.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I sent the council a memo about that, but I'll be happy to provide that to the Mr. Manager if you guys want to that again.
Okay. So thank you for that clarification. And just so you know, we don't have any elected officials on the Community Home Trust Board. Currently, I think we're all in receipt of the email from Makita, Miss Makita. Wesley, did you Did that email come through for the record? Thank you. And so what was interesting to me was what she said at the end. We don't have an interest there anymore, and I realize this is an interlocal agreement and everything that's tied to that, but there comes a time when you might have to do some reassessing, about these interlocal agreements. We don't have a seat at the table. So, I mean, I'm open to that discussion. And Brady, I'm gonna ask you again about the interlocal agreements and how that could potentially work. I'm not saying that we're gonna pull out, but I'm saying we need to keep an eye out because we don't have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about that interlocal agreement and what that would look like if any of us wanted to pull out, not just Carrboro, say Chapel Hill wanted to pull out. So what would that look like?
Are you talking about in terms of how the new statute would go in effect? Or
Just
interlocal
if you
agreement?
wanted to not be a part of the interlocal agreement anymore, any jurisdiction that's currently tied to an ILA, just in general.
I mean, I don't see anything that would go and preclude them from doing so unless they're tied to some previous interlocal agreement.
All right, I appreciate that. So I would like for that to be a discussion. We have to know where these funds are going. And since we don't have a seat at the table anymore, I think we kind of need to figure that out. Thanks.
Yeah, great points, Barbara. Thank you very much. And I think, thinking about those interlocal agreements, I appreciate you, Barbara, reminding us that we do have a few of them that we're engaged in, and kind of tying that to what comments Susan was also making, kind of maybe that all has to be part of the same conversation, I think is what maybe you're suggesting, Barbara. Is that right? Make sure that we don't lose sight of those other ILAs.
Right, everything's got to be included, I believe.
Thank you very much. Okay, Sammy.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Barbara was saying in terms of the community home trust, as we all received that email from Makita. And I think if I remember the history correctly, is that there's a formula for their portion of home ownership. And I don't think we ever changed that to include rentals. But if that is part of our agreement, then I totally agree. We need to look at that in light of what we are hearing from the community there in terms of how they're being treated and account for that. And if it's not part of that memorandum of understanding agreement with our other jurisdictions, then we have to look at the other funding that we give to the community home trust that does support the landings. So I'm glad that we are looking to have that conversation. I guess for this budget cycle, though, the question is, again, like maybe it's next week is too upon us to really have any significant opportunity to have a say on that, but definitely this is a year in advance of next year's budget, and we want to have this conversation happen and our decision, whatever it may be, before then.
Thank you, Sammy. I agree. Having that lead time is important. Barbara, yes.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on the information that was provided, it does say the funding model does not currently include support for the landing. And I would believe that that would be very important to all of us, to have them be a part of that. And I think that's what Makita was getting around to in her email.
Right. I think Community Home Trust has even stressed that point in years prior, that our current agreement in terms of our funding portion of the CHT agreement doesn't account for the fact that the landings includes, X number of units over and above the home ownership unit that the agreement does support. So thank you, Barbara, for that. Eleazar.
Yeah, first, thank you for that presentation. Just real quick, because I'm still learning. From my understanding, is any organization that receives funds, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but receives funds from the town has to submit some kind of report, right? Does those report encompass kind of like the questions we're asking up here?
Do you mean like an annual report or an annual report? I know some do. I don't know if that's consistent across all of them, but I
Okay.
do know some provide that information.
I'm just wondering, right, because as we were asking these questions, and again, I wasn't here before last week, so I'm still digesting this big thing. But it's good for me to know what organizations will be required to submit a report and what kind of is asked in those reports, right? As we are looking at how funding is used and how better allocate from this table, we want to make sure. I want to make sure. I don't want to speak for the board. I want to make sure that I can have an understanding of what that's being used for. And I also don't want to burden some of these nonprofits that already have a lot of on their plate. But I definitely would like to know if it's possible which ones of those are required. Is there a threshold after a certain amount you're required to do this or not? Yeah, that's just something I would like to know.
Thank you, Eleazar. Do you have more, Susan?
Just
Go ahead.
one follow-up on what both Barbara and Eleazar mentioned, but as part of this process of looking at all of our interlocal agreements, it does seem like there should be some kind of consistency in terms of the role council plays. Are we a liaison that we can come and at least observe as not necessarily a voting member, but maybe some would like us to be voting members. But I think there should be a consistency in terms of our role on all of the, with all of the organizations on which we are providing the funding.
Or at the very least, a very clear agreement about who's responsible for what. That's right. Okay. Thanks all for those great comments. What I'm hearing here is a couple of, I guess, general categories of things. One is the manager has sort of indicated here as sort of a recommendation about how to move forward if we do, in fact, want to continue with this commitment on this first year of to the IFC. That it would also include the manager working on a scope of work with the IFC to lay out what that looks like, and also then use this next year, or probably less than a year, to work with our other jurisdictional partners on an ILA or some kind of agreement about how we move in the future. We've heard from, I think, Barbara, Susan, Sammy, I think Eleazar, Randy also, and others. I see a lot of nodding heads about this idea that conversation needs to include a larger question of how we collaborate with the county and the other towns on a mechanism for funding these kinds of human services. And we want to not remember that there are other existing ILAs in place, as Barbara mentioned, that need to be included in that larger conversation. Have I fairly summarized that in a broad way?
Yeah, just one small point,
Sure,
Damon,
Sammy.
just to make sure that we understand what agreements are already in place with Chapel Hill in terms of what is allowed at the IFC in terms of timing and how this affects the users of that space, so that we can have a full conversation with our other.
Thank you for that reminder, Sammy. You did pose a question for the manager about just understanding what the shelter rules on the restrictions on the existing shelter are that we would be helping to support services at. Thanks for that, Sammy. Danny.
And I did just want to remark quickly that my preference in a vacuum would be to fund the full 5-year ILA, and I think the reasons we are not doing that, it seems, are pretty compelling to me. But I really want to stress the importance of that county dialogue. The 5-year ILA is very important to get to, and what I'm hearing is pretty consistently that relative to other jurisdictions of our size, our county does not assume a comparable burden. And so not merely communication, but I really think that as we look to hammer out something that lasts, I would really like to stress the importance of having the county both cooperate, but also really hear the need to, this double taxation problem is vexing, and it places the county is placing us in a position of asking our residents for something quite difficult, and it's not a difficulty that we might not grant in this municipality, but I just want to be very clear on the record that by and large these are county expenses, and even though I've been sympathetic to this because I think it's extraordinarily important, the variable that I see in reaching a long-term 5-year commitment, the variable that I think would change minds, and what I'm hearing here, is for the county really to step up and not really just back and forth cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Mr. Manager, do you feel like you have the guidance you need on the IFC topic in particular?
Yes, I'm clear there. Yes.
So we agree to continue. Sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to be this 92,950 fund balance, as well as the partnership to end homelessness, which we're not quite there yet,
Mhm.
but both of those will be sourced from
Our fund balance.
our fund
Yes.
balance.
Mhm.
And I need to ask, I don't know if this is the appropriate time. I have a question about the request for the 6 staff positions. Should I wait till later, or can I just ask the question now?
Is that on the partnership item?
No, it's our staff position.
Our staff position.
What
Go,
was our
let's
town manager
go ahead and
recommend?
go ahead and ask that now, maybe,
Mhm.
so we understand what the question is.
Yeah, and so it just goes back to Councilmember Posada's question. And so I appreciate your explanation. And if you were put in a position where this council said, we'll give you 3 of those positions and phase in the other 3 next year, what positions would you say out of those 6? I'm not, I guess I asked the question because I look at how we did the affordable housing. We phase that in. I am well aware that we need staff. But also was just wondering if there was any way that maybe we could do some positions this year, some positions next year. Of course, you know, we'll certainly listen to what you have to say, as that is in your scope, you know, about staff and what your needs are. But if you were put in that position, are you able to say which ones you would want to go first and some that may be? Because council may not be in favor of this, but I did want to ask the question.
I'm not prepared tonight to answer that, but if that's
Okay.
direction from council, I certainly give that some thought. And we try to be very considerate and thoughtful and careful, even in recommending those positions. But if that's an interest of council, I can certainly go back and give that some thought and bring forth some prioritization if that's your request.
I mean, it's my request. I don't know about everybody else. I mean, I would like to have that information. I don't know if anybody else is interested in that, because sometimes you just can't do everything all at once with so many competing things competing for budget money. So that was just a thought. Now, I'm interested. I don't know if anybody else is interested. I don't want anybody to take offense at the question. It's a question. I think it's a real question.
Danny.
I would be interested in a sense of priority, and one thing that I think would help me with that, when you say fund balance here, what, you know, looking through the budget message at the beginning, I mean, I guess just like, is there some, do we have a bottom line for how, like, how much buffer we typically keep, how much that cuts into this buffer, and thing, you know, just sort of it sounds to me like there's room for these, but I guess just toward what risk in coming out of that fund balance, and then, you know, using that information to compare some of these other requests, I suppose.
So yes, we do have fiscal policies around the use of fund balance, but here, and every dollar counts, so I don't in any way think that I'm suggesting that this money doesn't count. But in terms of fund balance, we're talking about, I think, roughly around 8 million or so. So this amount, the 92,000 plus, if you do the other 30-some thousand, we're talking 120-some thousand, relative to the $8 million fund balance.
Cool, thank you.
Eleazar.
Yes, so I did ask the question, so I would be in line to, or I would be favorable to having that prioritization. I don't know how I would vote after that, but I would like to see that. So I don't know if we actually need to take a vote or something like that, but I'll leave it to the mayor to guide me on that. But I would, on the other hand, thank you, Danny, for bringing that question, because I was going to ask, you know, for not super on top of all the slogan here, but just for my sake, sorry to take too much time here, but can you explain that again to me? What a fund balance is, what we would typically see, is that so that in case something goes over, we have, I don't know, I mean, you know, obviously an organizational and house budget is very different than a town budget, so I would like to understand that.
If you would mind, I'd like to spend some one-on-one time with you. There's a lot to explain about the local government commission and their fund balance requirements, all those kinds of issues, but I'd be happy to talk with you in greater detail to explain how all that works within our local government in North Carolina.
Will do.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, Eleazar and Barbara and Richard. So I do want to note that both Barbara and Eleazar have expressed an interest in some more information from the manager about how he would prioritize those requested new staff positions. I don't personally object to getting more information. I'm I think the manager's recommendation makes a lot of sense to me, but I also don't object to us getting more information if that's what council is happy to do, since we've had both, at least 2 council members express interest. Okay. All right. So can we, Susan?
I had one question about the budget in terms of stipends for advisory board members. Are we dealing with that now, or are we
Let's,
waiting till the end of the meeting
Yeah,
for
since
that?
I think I'm going to suggest that what we do is get back to the items that the manager presented in his presentation, and then we'll hold maybe some of these additional items like that one, Susan, until the end, since we do want to make sure to get through the stuff in the presentation. And we also have another piece after this related to the climate budget. So I think we're good on the IFC issue. Is that right, everyone? Manager has his guidance on that, which is consistent with what he showed us on the slide here. Let's move on and talk about the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness expansion request. As the manager mentioned, what Chapel Hill has decided to do is to move forward with supporting the SORAD portion of that request. Again, I think consistent with their other discussions around the partnership to have this larger conversation around the kind of longer term agreement to support those kinds of services. Any questions or comments on the partnership expansion request? Randy?
Yeah. Mr. Manager, I'm wondering if the SORAD 43,971, is that monies that you're thinking could come from ARPA or from the Affordable Housing Specialty Fund? Where specifically?
So in terms of using ARPA funding, what I believe would happen there is that they would be like a sub-recipient, which would mean a different set of reporting requirements, compliance, those kinds of issues. That's why I didn't recommend the ARPA funding, because I think that takes us down a different path in terms of reporting and compliance.
You're recommending for the partnership, for whatever we decide around the partnership request, that also, like IFC, would come out of fund balance.
Yes.
Susan, and then Danny.
Just a couple questions, Mr. Manager. First is, do we have any information on why Chapel Hill prioritized SORAD? They just pulled that out as opposed to the other 2 programs that were available for us to provide funding for the expansion.
Yeah, I don't have specific information on that, but I can get that and share it with council to better understand why they chose that particular program.
Mm-hmm. Just in terms of the consistency with Chapel Hill, it's tempting to do the same thing, but I would love to know a little bit more about why they pulled out SORAD. And then my other question is, let's say we did expand the funding for SORAD. The continuation funding is for 2.625 positions. And are any of those positions SORAD positions? So in other words, is there any overlap in that funding?
I don't think so. I think they're broken down by those various programs. In the slide I showed you with the 3 choices, I think those are the positions within each of those categories.
Okay.
For example, SORAD has 4 continuing positions, Rapid Rehousing has 1, and the Housing Stability Coordinator, Housing Locator has 1.5 positions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Next I have Danny and then Sammy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think personally I would be interested in not pulling any of these out. As we look at the way that these 3 programs work together, obviously they, intentionally from the partnership address different aspects of the crisis that we face, and I think considering what we're hearing about the health of our balance right now, this gives us a really good opportunity to start to address sort of all of the parts of the funnel that lead to the problem that we're in. And in particular, I mean, it sounds like SORAD is something that we are sanguine about, but I think it's important to consider the way that it intersects with these other programs, because what I see SORAD is building on in conversations we have in community is this need for community de-escalation and just more informed community care for people in crisis. And we are going to be not addressing the number of people in crisis as effectively. This rapid rehousing program strikes me as a very important component there. So all that's to say, I think that these work really powerfully together as presented. So I applaud the partnership for that. And I think it would be a mistake, considering the discussions that we're having, to pull, and the amount of money that we have on hand to meet this request, to pull any of the individual components out.
Sammy?
So I'm very excited about SORAD. I feel it is so rad in the sense of it really represents an opportunity to do policing in a different way, and we can build off of it. And perhaps that's partly what Chapel is thinking, that they're offsetting some of their policing costs and with SORAD. But I also want us to be thinking in those terms too, of exactly what the SORAD program represents and cost savings for our police department. But I want us to also be thinking in terms of expanding SORAD and having these conversations with our partners in SORAD on how to include mental health, for example. I know that part of the ARA funding includes funds specifically for mental health. And there may be an opportunity at this moment to really jumpstart that process, to have a broader conversation with our partners to get there, as has been modeled in so many other places. Like there was a recent article in just USA, of all places, USA Today, about Denver, and how by having a different entity responding to some of these first responder, but not necessarily to have gun incidences, the crime reduction has been significant. And that's not even to mention, the people's well-being in terms of like not having to be traumatized by engaging with an institution that unfortunately has a lot of baggage tied to it. So I would, obviously I'm supporting SORAD. What I'm saying too is I'm also interested in looking to augment funding for SORAD through some of our ARA funding, and kind of jumpstart that conversation with our neighbors on how to do public safety in a better way.
Thanks, Sammy. Barbara?
Is that Rachel I see back? Hey, Rachel. She heads up, everybody knows she heads up Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. Just a great person to work with. So I see rapid rehousing, SORAD, housing stability coordinator, housing locator. I, like council member now, am ready for the jump off and could do all three. But in addition, if I had to put them in some type of order, SORAD for sure. And also, I'm looking at rapid rehousing. They're asking for $67,000 in personnel costs and right around $197,000 for program costs, which include financial assistance for rent, utilities, deposits, and moving costs. And then number 3, we have homeless prevention, housing stabilization, which there's no programmatic funding. It's personnel, and so is a housing locator. But again, I am also in favor of all 3. And if I had to put them in some type of order, SORAD, rapid rehousing, housing stability coordinator, and housing locator, but they all work together as we just kind of move forward with this problem that we have with housing and getting homeless people off the street. So in that regard, I can see them all working together, but I don't know if any, who else is ready for the jump off. That's what I call it.
Thank you, Barbara. Eleazar?
Yes, so I'm sure it comes to no surprise to anyone that I also want to see all these 3 funded. That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
So I'll just say, it was helpful to see Richard's presentation about what each of these programs breaks out into and how the money would be used. And I noted, for example, that the bulk of the funding for the rapid rehousing portion of it would go to financial assistance, essentially direct financial assistance, which is assistance that we are already providing as a town through our own funds. And I don't know what that currently looks like in terms of what's left over from our most recent investment in those rental assistance funds in partnership with the county and the town. But I just point that out because it made me think that, again, we're sort of getting into this territory of, at least in my mind, wanting to understand the overlap with what we're already doing, as well as the issue that Danny mentioned earlier, which is something I also am very interested in trying for us to figure out over the next several months, which is this issue of, I don't know that double taxation is the right way to characterize it, but it is certainly the case that in expecting the municipalities to make substantial contributions to these services, county residents who happen to live within the town limits are paying more than county residents who happen not to live within town limits because of the mechanism that we've chosen as partners to fund these kinds of services. And up until now, that hasn't presented a big problem because we haven't been talking about very, very large investments of the type that we're now being asked to consider. And so for the same reason that I had that concern about the IFC request, I have the same concern about the Orange County Partnership to Own Homelessness request, although I care very much about us participating in both programs because they're so incredibly important. But I think this time that I feel like Chapel Hill Town Council has rightly seemed to be seeking to figure out that longer term problem about how we're going to partner with the county and the towns to fund these kinds of human services is important both for the IFC question and for the partnership question. So that's why I'm hesitant about the idea of, as Barbara frames it, jumping off, right, and going for all three. I would be more comfortable personally with being consistent with what Chapel Hill has decided to do for this first year, and then including the partnership request in this larger conversation we talked about earlier, and trying to figure out the mechanism we're going to be using for, and what the right formula is and all of that for funding these services countywide. So I just offer that thought on this item. Any comments? Let's see. Sammy.
Just as follow up to that point, Damon, which I appreciate, I'm curious to understand whether Chapel Hill is putting in their percentage fully towards SORAD, or whether they are cutting out the other ones and keeping it the same, if that makes any sense. Because if we are going to entertain what you're suggesting, that's something we should understand what we're talking about, whether we're going to allocate the 13,528 plus the 37,000, bulk it up towards SORAD, or are we just talking about the 43,971?
My understanding, and maybe Richard can correct me if I'm wrong about it, is that what Chapel Hill's Town Council decided to do with this request was to fund their portion of the SORAD program and to hold back on the other two categories until, again, we've had this larger conversation about the long-term future.
Yes, to pay their portion. Yes, like we're paying our portion, they would pay their similar portion of the cost.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Eleazar and then Barbara?
Yeah, just to go a little bit deeper in this, I definitely want to have the conversation about how do we move into a more sustainable conversation. But in the meantime, or situation, but in the meantime, while I still want to know why Chapel Hill, so I would definitely welcome that information. I just see these services as extraordinarily important that while we're having the conversation and we're getting our stuff together and we're finding ways of sustainable, I don't want these services in any way, shape, or form to be affected by our conversation that still needs to happen, and we'll be finding ways of doing this in a more sustainable way. I just don't want to pause now, have the conversation, and then in the meantime, those services might be affected or yeah, I'm just not comfortable with that. I think I'm all on board for having conversations how we do this in a better partnership, how we do this better with the county, find other ways of making it sustainable. But in the meantime, I don't want to in any way, shape, or form affect the ability of those services to continue while we're having that conversation.
That's a really good point, Elisa. Thank you. I think Barbara, you had your hand up. Do you still want to say?
Thank you, Mayor.
And then Danny.
And so I agree with what Councilmember Posada said, because, you know, imagine if it were you waiting for these services. None of us have to worry about that, right? We're okay until we're not okay. So while we're sitting here haggling about money that the town manager says can come, am I correct, Mr. White, from the fund balance? This is where it would come from. Thank you. I am with Councilmember Posada that, you know, I don't want anybody to be going without anything while we're sitting here waiting. And this is more than likely what's going to happen. You know, I'm looking at Rachel and she's shaking her head. And so I'm all for the conversation and all that, but I need to humanize that, you know, for the folks who sit and wait for us to take these actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that point very much. I want us to be very clear that regardless of which of these routes we take on this particular item, that when we talk about that conversation, which we're now calling it euphemistically perhaps, it is something, it has to happen. As we increasingly get these larger and larger requests to participate as a municipality in providing these services, which, notwithstanding Jackie's very thoughtful comments at the last meeting, are largely seen in North Carolina as county functions. We do need to have that serious conversation about the town's plural roles in those arrangements. Not because I don't want to support those programs. I very much do. They're, I think, core programs for this entire community. Literal survival, as Barbara was talking about, people's individual experience. But we have to do it in a way that can be sustained. As you all know, when we first formed the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, the reason we did that and the reason that we chose to support the fund in the way we did, which is to say through our property taxes, is because that was the way to find a sustainable source of revenue for that program. Otherwise, we were every year dipping into the fund balance, which over time, obviously, diminishes. So that conversation that we're talking about has to happen over the next year or less so that we know what move we're going to make when we're sitting at this table in June of 2023, right? So I just want to stress that when I talk about the conversation with Orange County, with Chapel Hill, with Hillsborough, this can't be something we put off. It can't be something we're saying, oh yeah, we're going to talk about it. It's incredibly important to the future of all of these programs. Randy, and then Susan.
Yeah,
I might have been skipped.
I'm very sorry. He's right. Danny was first, and then Randy, and then Susan. Thank you for the correction.
I'm curious,
I even had it written down, and I wasn't looking at my notes.
given that there is at least significant appetite for the full jump off, what our process would be tonight. I personally, given the discussion we've had here and that next week is a week out, I would not be thrilled to be voting on a budget that just had SORAD in it. So I'm curious what we're looking to get to tonight.
Yeah, I mean, we want the manager to go away with knowing what our desire is to see in his final budget next week. We've heard three of you certainly say that you would like to see all three components, or all of the components of the Orange County Partnership expansion request included. I have to say, despite my very strong concerns as I've tried to express them in the way that I do, I feel like Eleazar just talk about it a little bit in the way that he did. I'm thinking about, IFC came to us with their request, and we said, okay, for the first year, and then we're going to figure the rest out. It's, Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness has also come to us with their request, and now we're talking about picking it apart. Maybe we don't need to be doing that. I appreciate LESR hitting on that point along with Barbara. So I guess what I'd like to hear more, we've heard next on, and Danny, if you're finished with your comment, next is Randy and then Susan. And maybe we can get towards some sense of what we're sending away with the manager away with here on this particular budget item. Randy?
You know, overall, I'm not interested in picking this apart, but I fully respect that Chapel Hill did so thoughtfully and for a reason. And I also just want to say that to manager and staff, I fully respect the budget that you brought forward to us. I know the kind of work that you put in, and you do so because you're looking at the financial stability and the financial sustainability of the town of Carrboro. And I say that because we're coming through a time period of pandemic and quarantine that we never expected. And $8 million in fund balance sounds like a lot, but it's not when you don't know what's happening around the corner. And we do not know what's happening around the corner. And our responsibility is to close to 22,000 people when we have no idea what could happen next, because none of us expected March 13th, 2020. And I say that because my experience on council and the Board of Aldermen has taught me to be very mindful of what the managers and the financial officers have brought to us. There is a reason they understand how vibrancy and the stability of the town works financially. We all are we're political people. What is happening with the, with the town, we look at it and we're thinking in terms of policy, we're thinking in terms of values that the communities share with us. But staff, manager, financial officer do not look at things in that way. And I just have to say that because it goes with what Damon is saying about we need to be clean and clear about what we think is the responsibility of the county. We understand that the services are not being met fully. And in our hearts, we want the services to be met fully. But Carrboro can't shoulder disproportionately what is needed to be shared, not only with the other municipalities, but by the county, because those are county responsibilities. Housing is a county responsibility. Human services is a county responsibility. And as Damon, stated very clearly, we need to have this conversation because when it was 25,000 and it escalated to 50,000, but now we're talking $100,000, and as I said, we don't know what we don't know coming down the pike. And I guess the last 2.5 years has really taught me that what we think we have in reserves on any given day, when we have to face, God forbid, a disaster, we need to know that that buffer is there. And that's why the auditing and the fiscal accounting is done the way it does, and why we have the stature fiscally that we have, because we have people like Arch and we have people like Richard who are going to say to us, you could do this. This is the way to do it, but remember what you're going into if you do it. So I just want to acknowledge the time and the effort that you've put in to make the wisest of options for us. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say regarding prioritization of positions, and even whether or not this, taking this out of the fund balance as a full complement would be wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Susan.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I think we're all trying to be good financial stewards, at the same time balancing that with supporting organizations that are providing really vital services, in some cases life and death services. So it's been a really good conversation to be a part of. I just wanted to, one thing I should have mentioned earlier on, and I should have mentioned it right at the get-go, is I am on the board for Porch, which we like to consider ourselves as a collaborator and partner with IFC, but the reality is we also do compete for funding, and so I should have mentioned that right at the beginning. And I also just wanted to add that this whole idea, these interlocal agreements, is very interesting right now. We are seeing them in housing, in emergency housing services, affordable housing. But it will be interesting to see if other nonprofits in the community go this route as well. Other groups that are providing very vital services, whether it's food insecurity or mental health or substance use or domestic violence, also in some cases life and death issues. So this may be a new way of us doing some of this, is looking for these collaborative opportunities with the other townships in the county, that we can all be providing really critical services in a consistent and equitable way. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Barbara?
Thank you, Mayor. Can we please get on the other side of this? I feel like we're at a point, at a decision point. I'm not the mayor, but I'm just saying, what I see.
Yep.
And I think we just need to do that. And I did want to ask Mr. White, with the options that you have brought forward for IFC and Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness, and this may be for you or Arch. Are you bringing this forward as options to us for information, or have you just kind of have you been able to weigh the costs of moving forward with this? In other words, seeing our way clear, even if we move forward, say we move forward fully funding both. Do you see that as being problematic? I'm looking at Art, but I'm also looking at, I guess it would be you, Mr. White. Thank you.
So I think that was the goal of the work session, to get some idea of what council's looking for. Then Arch and I will work toward whatever it is you would like for us to put into the budget. We weren't quite certain which way you go, but where we land tonight, we'll make sure that we bring you back the best advice in terms of how to proceed.
He's smart. That's a good answer.
Well, in the interest that Barbara has expressed in us keeping on here, I want to suggest that what I think I'm hearing is an interest, at least among most council members, in seeing the full request reflected in the budget. I don't see any problems with that. Okay, Sammy?
Yeah, I agree with that. I just wanted to add, like we did with the previous one, that as we have the conversations on how to go forward in a more permanent way, and I'm sure that this goes without asking, but that the rapid rehousing portion, which the mayor correctly points out, looks like it overlaps with other housing efforts that we have, that we get the full explanation for how this is unique and necessary, and maybe not aligned with those other methods for providing that kind of housing, to help us decide on how we're going to go forward thereafter.
Great point, Sammy. Thank you. I think I saw Eleazar's hand. Were you just kind of nodding in agreement there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. And get on with it? Okay.
I just
Susan?
had one other, I think you probably already had this in your notes, but just a little bit more on Chapel Hill, why they made the decision that they did. Is there anything from their decision that we should be aware of? I know this is ultimately what we want to do, but just anything in their decision-making that we should be aware of would be great.
Thank you, Susan. And next, Mr. Manager, I think you wanted some discussion about this issue of the additional half-cent. As we talked here and seem to be moving as a body towards some interest in funding both of these requests in the first year, I am adding together the $92,950 requested by IFC. The total, I believe, if I have this right, $129,976 requested for the expansion of the Partnership to End Homelessness. Arithmetic has never been my thing, but I believe that comes to over $220,000 in additional spending on the spectrum of housing needs in this county. The equivalent of a half-cent tax on our tax rate is $129,000 or so. I think I got that right from the presentation. So it seems to me that if we did do this in our budget, we're talking about well over the equivalent of 2 pennies on our property tax rate that Carrboro would be spending on housing and housing assistance. So I'm just sharing that to maybe carry us through to the next item and wondering if we need more discussion about that. But I wanted to share my math with everyone. Eleazar, you're next.
Yes. So I was one of the council members that asked to get information about what this was and how it would show up. Let's be clear. I want to be clear about my position. I do not want to raise taxes. I want to find funding for this in the funding we already have. So that I just want to be very clear from my very get-go that I do not want to raise taxes. I think this is important services, whether it comes out of the balance or somewhere else in the budget. All I care about is that this is funded. Well, that's not all I care about. Big thing I care about is getting this funded. And also, given that we are moving forward with just a 1-year, I guess, adjustment or, stopgap measure while we figure out what's going on with the town and with the county and all the other partnerships, townships, sorry. I think we could either pull it from the balance or what's already been suggested with the ARPA funding, but yeah.
Thanks, Eleazar. I have Barbara next.
Yeah, and so I'll follow up with what Councilmember Posada said. I don't think any of us are interested in a tax increase for this other half-cent. I would like to see the half-cent come in at some point. The more money that we have on affordable housing, the more we can do when opportunities present themselves, and the more money the AHAC has to work with, when projects come to them that they have to make decisions on. And so I just truly in a community where affordability continues to be an issue, and that's not going to change. That's why I keep looking for more money here. I just think that that's somewhat of a, not even really a balance, but just trying to keep some money in the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, like I said, for any affordable housing opportunities that may come up. And I also wanted to ask, I see the recommended fiscal year 23 budget, $380,230. And Mr. White, do you know what the current balance is? Like what's in there now? It'll carry over, right? So that'll be what or you don't have that. If you don't have it, I
don't have it at my hand. We can get that.
Yeah, and so I kind of feel like we need to have like discussion like yesterday around all of this, because what I feel like we're doing is we're giving that first year, and then we don't know what we're going to do, in subsequent years. And the community survey consistently asks for more affordable housing in our community, and that's our community speaking to us. And so I feel like that's another reason. And I'm fine with the ARPA money. I know, Mr. White, there was $44,000 that came in that 1.1 million that you set aside for affordable housing, wasn't there?
So the 41,000 number is the
Was it
growth, is the growth
41,000?
in
Okay.
revenue from FY '22 to FY '23.
Right.
That's the expected growth we will see in that 1.5 cents.
Okay.
And that's included in the 380,000.
Oh, it's already in,
It's already
okay,
part of
okay.
that, yes.
Yeah, so long story short, the ARPA money, if we can figure out, how to have that, get some of that into the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, that would be great. But I'm still very interested in that other half cent at some point. So, thanks.
Danny?
Just wanted to add my support for using the ARPA money to cover this half-cent gap. Taking your prompt, Mayor, I hear that we are laying out, honestly, a massive investment in housing if we pursue this route. But I think to Barbara's point, it is the issue that is at top of mind when we talk to most constituents. And I also think this is an appropriate year to be doing this. I mean, I would really urge us to consider, I mean, we have so much to consider. But that we all saw that headline 2 weeks ago with Facebook coming. We're anticipating property values will double again in the next 10 years here. And we do not have a plan for this. And we are talking now, I think, very productively, perhaps the most productively in the past 6 months in my experience, about what it's going to take to get to that plan. But to get to that plan, we're learning how difficult it is to get to that place of planning from austerity and from the norm of having all of our partners be scrapping for cents. The people who are setting our models are scrapping for cents. The people we might rely on as collaboration partners are scrapping for cents. And when that's the environment that we're in, it is just not the spirit that, I mean, our citizens know we need, I'm so sorry to soapbox at y'all. I really didn't mean to do this, but we do really need a radical intervention in our housing market. And to try and do that from anything less than a position of real strength and real commitment and real investment and firing on all cylinders as we do that, I think if we didn't have the ARPA money, I may be singing a different tune. I would not want this level of expense coming out of a rainy day, but there's a very real sense in which this is recovery. I mean, what drove the housing boom so precipitously up in these last 2 years was this pandemic and our desirability, the space that's available here, companies moving out of metropolitan areas. So using this money to address this particular issue, I think, is very appropriate. And I also do think that it is worth marking that we would be saying then that we're committing to this hugely. So let's not welch on that check over the coming year. And if we're going to sink $400,000 some odd dollars out of 70 minutes worth of discussion, I think that we need to hold a promise to ourselves to really make good on this strategically.
Mm-hmm.
I have Sammy next, and then go back to Barbara.
Yeah, so I hear a common theme here. It's really all these other things that are pulling on us in terms of what to spend our money on the budget. And I keep making this point that there's an opportunity to really synergize with these other efforts. Now, our next item is about climate action. And specifically, there's an item about weatherizing all low-income homes in the town of Carrboro, which happens to overlap with affordable housing. And so what I'd like to really propose is that that we really strongly consider this drop in the bucket, half-cent property tax through ARPA, not raising the taxes, allocated towards really putting a dent towards weatherizing all our low-income homes in Carrboro. Because climate action also shares a high, it's very high in our comprehensive plan, and it's the second item on this discussion of chipping away at our budget. So we need to be creative and synergizing and making these dollars stretch as best as we can. And I look forward to hearing about that report on how much that will cost and what effect it will have on achieving both of our goals for affordable housing and climate action.
Barbara, I have you next.
Thank you, Mayor. And so Randy mentioned, about some of the effects of the pandemic. And so the pandemic also opened up the very great need. I mean, it just opened it all the way open for what we knew was already there. And so I wanted to mention that. as we continue to discuss which way we're going with this. And also the mayor's comments, about the 2 cents between the IFC and the Orange County Partnership to end homelessness. But that money is going there. And then, that the AHAC needs money to do their work, unless I'm misunderstanding what you said, Mayor. Because to me, I look at the two very separately. The Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, and I may be misunderstanding what you said. If I am, go ahead and clarify before I get too far down the road.
I'm not sure if you're misunderstanding. I think what I was simply sharing is that we've heard this interest from some of the housing advocates that we either have 2 cents of our property tax rate dedicated to affordable housing, or we spend the equivalent of 2 cents on our property tax rate on affordable housing. And what I was suggesting is that in agreeing conceptually to honor both the IFC request and the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness request, we would be exceeding that proposal to spend the equivalent of an additional 0.5 cent of our property tax rate on issues related to affordable housing. Normally, if we were talking about the sustainable method we've used in the past couple of years to fund these services, for example, our existing contribution to the Partnership to End Homelessness, that is part of that comes out of the ACAC money, right? That comes out of the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund. And presumably that's where it will continue to come out of if we continue in the future years beyond a year from now to get that money.
Okay.
But since the manager has recommended that if we go this way, we would use general fund dollars for the fund balance to support those 2 requests, that's not an issue this time around. But I just wanted to make sure we all understood that by agreeing to those 2 requests, we are more than meeting the interest that's been expressed by our housing advocates, spend the equivalent of 2 cents on the property tax rate on affordable housing.
Yeah, but all of it doesn't equate to units, though, because some of it's tied up in personnel costs.
That's true.
And so,
That's true. That's true today too, though, of course.
thank you for
Thank you, Barbara. Next I had, that was Barbara. Susan, you next?
I just wanted to, 2 quick things to your point. Damon, I think the other townships in the county are all providing, before this interlocal agreement, I think they were all providing less than a penny on the property tax to affordable housing. So we were already providing the most at 1.50 pennies. So just keeping that perspective in mind as well. And I do want to say, I just wanted to weigh in quickly on the taxation. I'm really glad that we're doing it the way that we are, especially now. Because really every time somebody goes to the grocery store or the gas station, it's close to a 10% tax right there. And I think we need to keep that in mind in terms of this, really historically high inflationary period we're living through right now. I think I appreciate that we're using the fund balances.
Barbara? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I did it again. Eleazar is next, and then Barbara.
Yeah, no, I think I just wanted to bring something up that I forgot to mention. First is I want to also build on the gratitude and respect that I have to all the staff and to your budget, Mr. Mayor, or your proposed budget. I don't want any of my questioning to be construed as other than that. I'm also, as council member Haven O'Donnell mentioned, I was put in this position through the community, and one of my biggest priorities that folks decided to entrust in me, and when they voted for me, is to advocate and push for affordable housing. So I'm definitely going to be pushing on that and making sure that while we're doing this process and while I'm up here, I continue to ensure that that's a priority for this council, at least to the extent of my ability. And I just want to be clear that none of my questions or concerns about what we currently have in the budget is in any way a negative reflection or in any way meant to disrespect you or anyone on staff. I also want to also be in the spirit of transparency. Mention that I'm also on the board of Porch, as well as the chamber, and members of the chamber have expressed support for supporting. But again, none of these, from my understanding, me sitting on these boards would not affect this decision here tonight. I just want to make sure that that is transparent. I'm transparent as I can with not just folks here, but also folks at home. Thanks.
Barbara?
I just wanted to mention about comparing ourselves to other municipalities and what they're doing or what they're not doing. I take Chapel Hill, for example, who's working with a much larger budget. And so, 1 cent is a lot of money for them, not to mention they're actually in a position to do affordable housing, like all over the place, something that we are not. And so I think any and all monies that can go towards affordable housing should absolutely go there. We're not going to be able to turn back on that because we're expensive and we're getting more expensive, to Councilmember Nowell's point. And so we might as well set ourselves in that position if we're serious about affordable housing. We have to put the money there. Thank you.
Right, so we've got here, so now we're on this item on the half-cent issue. I'll kind of, from my perspective, bring it back to some similar to my previous comments, which is I'm all about us being all out there on supporting these priorities. But we have to be looking ahead to how to do it in a way that's sustainable. It's fine to say we're going to do it this coming fiscal year. That's great. It's very exciting for us to be able to do this, to be able to dip into our reserves and do something like this big. It's fantastic. What about the next year and the years after that? So I think that's just where I want to make sure we're keeping at least a part of our focus on as we move forward with this idea of including these items in our budget, that it's going to have to be sustained in some way, and that's ultimately going to mean a tax increase. That's how we raise revenue. So, and I think that sort of tie that to my previous comments about this larger question of really happy to be able to support the IFC, really happy to be able to support the expansion of our homelessness programs. But I want to be able to do that in the long term too, if it's needed, which it will be. All right, Randy?
Yeah, Barbara, I'm really glad you mentioned unit because, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that we're really not adding stock. And I want to be sure that the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund has the monies that will help us to provide partnership, creating more stock. And I'll just come behind Damon to say in a simple phrase, yes, I want to see these things done, but I also worry that there's short-term solutions for the long-term problem. And we really just have to get down to cases about what the long-term financial game plan needs to be.
Thank you. Just to throw one more item into this conversation before we move on. Mr. Manager, how much money is the town getting in ARPA funding?
Our total allocation was $6.7 million.
$6.7 million. And so we've heard, Barbara had that, and a couple other folks had a good reminder to us of our recent community biennial survey and other indicators we've had from members of the community of the very important concern around the affordability of living here and affordable housing programs in particular. That's a very easy pot of money right there for us to be thinking about using. Managers presented to us, staff has presented to us a preliminary look at how we might think about how to allocate those funds, and that's great. And it sounds like if we go forward with wanting to do this half-cent additional thing, the recommendation is that we would use the ARPA money to start with rather than raise the tax rate. But just offer that as a reminder that we have $6.5 million to spend in the next has to be in the next like 3 years or something, doesn't it, or less, on whatever we want to spend it on that's related to impacts from the pandemic, housing and whatnot. So just making sure we keep in mind that we also don't, we have some flexibility here, right? But again, we got to spend that now. And then also think about those issues of the longer term. Danny.
To that point, is there a world where, I mean, in that horizon, could we do this 3 more times for this particular expense? If we are talking about $129,000, that is 1/18 of that money, less even over the course of those 3 years. And I mean, and also to the point about sustainability, my understanding is we have been talking about transitioning to a 5-year ILA, which does build that sustainability into its own equation. So I share that, and I don't mean to be pushing us down an unsustainable path at all. But it seems like we have these divergent issues here. One of which is a stopgap out of the general fund balance, which is not anybody's preferred tactic, but perhaps important here. And then we have this ARPA money, which I think I'm hearing is pretty sustainable in a longer horizon than we look at many issues. If we were able, in fact, do we have 3 years? Is that about right? 2?
I think it's 2 years. We'd have to.
Could we, within those 2 years, could we commit, say, 5 years of this increase and consider that spent? Or like, is that? Yeah, okay.
Right.
Okay, right on. So 2 years until we would have to consider a tax raise.
All right. So how, and I think, again, we know what the funding sources are. That doesn't answer the other question of that, how we partner with the county and the other towns in the longer term to support these efforts as well. So whether it's ARPA or tax raise or, general fund or fund balance. So, Mr. Manager, you've recommended that if we do want to add this additional funding to the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund, that we would do that using ARPA money. And that's $129,355 on top of the 1.5 pennies worth that we already put into that fund.
Yes.
Is everyone feeling comfortable with us doing that with this ARPA money in the coming fiscal year?
Mhm.
Right. Okay. Let's move on then, Mr. Manager. Do you have what you need from us at this point?
I do, yes.
On these items?
Yes, I do. Yes, thank you.
We'll move on to the climate action budget. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Great to be here tonight to talk with you. I'm going to be presenting some information on several items. Those include a cost estimate of weatherizing all low-income homes in Carrboro by 2030, a follow-up to the June 2019 resolution regarding climate action goals and budget plan, as well as our progress on our current emissions reduction and future modeling that we've used to see possible ways we could meet our climate action goals, as well as cost estimates for these potential emissions reduction initiatives. So to start, I'm going to present the estimated cost to weatherize all low-income homes in Carrboro by 2030, as requested at the May 24th Town Council meeting. As attachment I in your packet, you had a memo that was prepared by our Housing and Community Services staff member, Anne Marie Vanneman, with assistance from Dan Sargent, who is the Executive Director of Rebuilding Together of the Triangle. And the findings in this memo show that there are an estimated 624 homes in Carrboro that are owned by households earning less than $75,000, which were built on or before the year 2000 and are located in the qualified census tracts. This does not include condos, only single-family homes. And the total estimated cost, based on the specific types of heating systems that these houses have, is $6.2 million. And there are several considerations to take into account when looking at this cost estimate. And in order to determine the total eligibility and costs, we'll need some further evaluation, which includes a full assessment of these homes based on their size, conditions, the interests of the owners, and the needs, because there were several assumptions made in the estimation based on the size of the houses and things like that. as well as a determination of the actual ownership of the homes and occupancy as well as residency. And so I will follow up with our housing and community services staff who could not be here tonight if you all have any questions that I cannot answer and get any more information that you need. The next topic I will discuss is a timeline of accomplishments that staff and advisory board members have taken towards addressing the June 2019 resolution regarding climate action goals and budget plan. This resolution had several different items within it, and to start, staff and the EAB looked at the latest climate research, including recommendations and research on climate equity, and really looked to see how our goals and our climate action plans could be updated based on the latest research and latest science. And so the EAB members reviewed these plans, they presented updated goals and recommendations, which were incorporated into the plans and presented to the council, which you all accepted. So now we have updated plans as well as updated goals, and those goals involve an 80% reduction in 2010 levels of emissions by 2030 on both the municipal side of things as well as the community. In addition, staff in early 2020 presented a 10-year climate emergency budget proposal showing one pathway where we could reach our emissions reductions and associated costs with that. In addition, the EAB presented a memo on the structure of the current structure of advisory boards, and due to that memo, the council created a new advisory board called the Climate Action Team, which focuses solely on climate action. In addition, the climate action budget is now a separate budget managed by the planning department, presented to the council annually, and the budget is based on a work plan that's developed by staff and reviewed by the climate action team every year. In addition, staff continue to apply for grants. We really want to work to leverage as much state and federal funding towards climate action initiatives as possible, and so that's something that we will continue to do to meet our goals. In addition, now that we have an idea of where we need to go, we have our new goals, we really need to take a look at our current emissions. So in 2019, with the help of a graduate student, we redid our community emissions inventory. And so as you can see on this graph, this shows our community and municipal emissions in 2012, and then in 2019, and where we need to go in 2030 based on an 80% reduction. And each color on that each column is a different sector of emissions. So some of it is emissions due to electricity, vehicle usage, natural gas usage. And these brackets on the right show the percentage of emissions that are come from the community and percentage of emissions that come from the municipal side of things, which is the town, the schools, and Chapel Hill Transit. So as you can see, over 90% of the emissions are attributed to the community. And we really need to really try to work with grassroots efforts to really meet our goals. And so now that we have an idea of where we are and where we need to go, we can do some modeling to see how we can get there. And so the next steps we took are every year when we work on our environmental sustainability work plan, we calculate emissions reduction for all the initiatives and projects that we think will complete this year, and we look at whether those initiatives will also have emissions reductions in future years or whether they might need to be expanded. And so I created a model by using this year's current plans, all the initiatives we have planned, and I just projected them out for the next 8 years. So I said, what if we did these same projects every year for the next 8 years at the same level? And I looked at, how would this be enough to meet our goal? And in reality, we will need to adjust some of these projects or add new initiatives that might have different emissions reductions that we haven't calculated yet in order to meet that 80% goal. So I used some of the projects that we know metrics for. For example, we have really great metrics from our WISE program for our Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund. So I looked at how we could kind of change and maybe expand some of those programs to meet the goals. I looked at emissions reduction estimates I calculated for initiatives like the Green Neighborhoods program. Maybe we need to engage more residents next year, and just tried to kind of create a model that would be something that we could use to track our progress and meet our goals. One thing to note is that in this model, something we have that we have not looked at before is carbon sequestration by our urban forests. And there's a new tool that came out, an organization called ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. We use their software to do our community emissions inventory. They came out with a new program called Learn, and it's really great. It uses GIS, it looks at tree cover within our city limits, and it comes up with an annual amount of carbon sequestration by our trees. And so that is something that we can incorporate into our model because trees perform this great ecosystem service for us, and they're a big part of our accounting. We just didn't have any information before. And so that's one really great progress that we've made. And so after we looked at one potential pathway using some projects that we already have in motion, we estimated what costs might these initiatives entail starting next year, FY 23-24, what we might need to look at budgeting for. And so the next steps are that we're going to need to refine this model every year, not only based on the success of our initiatives, but also based on grassroots efforts of town residents, because community members are very passionate about this all the time. They're working to reduce their carbon footprints, and we need to make sure that we're accounting for that and looking at all different pieces in this puzzle. And so on the next two slides, I just show the two charts that were presented in your packet. This is the model with some emissions reduction calculations I came up with for this year and what we might need to do in future years. And there are definitely things that we still need to work to calculate. Things that, for example, in the transportation section, which we don't have great metrics for, and things that in the bottom row that we also are kind of waiting for a little more information before we really determine what sort of impact they might have and how much it might cost. For example, we're waiting to get results back from our fleet study until we can really get some great numbers for that. And so this chart just shows the model represents approximately 10% reduction of emissions every year. And these are the associated costs based on expanding specific programs and one way we might reach our goal starting next fiscal year. And so what we'd like to know from you all tonight to help guide us in continuously monitoring and looking ahead to next year's budget, we're interested in knowing if this is the format that you would like to see presented to you annually, or if you're interested in something different. And thank you very much.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much. That was really great. And so I just want to kind of reiterate what Laura shared at the end there, which is the kind of direction that she and her colleagues are looking for tonight is really about, does this model of presenting and considering the information about our action around climate issues a sensible way for us of understanding the impact of how we spend money or could spend money. So we'll start with Sammy.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for all your work. It's always impressive what you're able to present and put together, and I'm very grateful and appreciative of that. This is really helpful in terms of understanding, per the resolution, a breakdown annual. What I think would also be valuable is like that initial aggregate of all the initiatives in terms of their price per cost and what the emissions reductions are, relating it back to this one. And I noticed the significant difference in cost estimations between that original one, which was like $200 million, and this one, which is less than a quarter. And that looks a lot more hopeful, but still very expensive. And but I think that we're getting closer to what we need to understand. Again, as was mentioned in the previous item, this kind of information needs to start developing, at the beginning of when we meet after the summer, so that, and not a week before our budget, because there is so much here to digest. And to that end, I would very much recommend enlisting the climate action team to help digest this. And the kind of work plan that's been shared with them has been very different. I feel it's been more along of what your specific staff work plan is, and I think this is a lot more comprehensive and gets more to what we need to do at large in the community. So I'd recommend having this be looked at by the Climate Council more so than your specific tasks over the next year, because I think it's what we need to understand better. So I think we're getting closer to it and just need to flesh this out. Obviously, the costs represented by this are enormous, and this is one big reason why I was prioritizing this over our choice in a lot of money invested over the town offices and the parking deck next to the library, because what you're showing here represents twice the amount that we're going to be investing on that project. And as we heard in our previous conversation, we need to find ways to make these things sustainable. And again, I'd like to reiterate the opportunities of finding synergistic opportunities as a way to accomplish both. And we won't always find synergistic opportunities, but those are the ones that we should pursue first, because otherwise we are, whatever that saying is, robbing Peter to feed Mary or whatever. Feed Paul, yes. But I'm very appreciative. I see that resolution being reflected here finally after 3 years. And I have to express a bit of frustration, because 3 years is a long time and the window for taking climate action is diminishing very quickly. And obviously, there's a lot on our shoulders as a little town without the support of the state, federal, or county governments. And counties supporting us, but not to the degree that is called for, as is shown in our local numbers. What they're providing through their grant program is very symbolic. And I have to mention also, it's unfortunate that the county commissioners dismantled the climate action council, because we were making some headway there, and hopefully, Mr. Mayor, you can prod that process along, because we can't afford the delays. Having said that, without much hope for including more on our budget, especially in regard to matching what is called for here, I guess the remaining question I have is, you did include fiscal year 22-23, and I'm just curious to understand those numbers in terms of, because on the furthest column it says type of funding and there's existing and new. I'm just wondering how much of that 6 million is being addressed in our current budget and how much isn't.
Sure, yes. So the numbers in the FY 22-23 column, many of those numbers are in the manager's proposed budget. The transportation is the only one that is a little different, because it represents all of the projects that we have programmed in this current STIP. And so that is, and so all of that money in FY 22-23, I use the money that we have in the proposed budget as the basis that we are already allocating towards climate action. So this, for example, the green category includes funding for Chapel Hill Transit, and the blue row, second from the bottom, is our climate action budget for this year. And so the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund, that's how much money is currently in the fund, as well as critical home repair and weatherization, that's how much money is in the proposed budget for this year. So all of that money I used as the basis.
Okay, great, thanks. And that relates to the previous graph too, in terms of reductions.
Yeah.
And so again, just to reiterate, these two need to also be informed by that broader one, which is kind of the bridge, so to say, in terms of costs per these projects and impact in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. And I look forward to further delving into this with our climate action team. And again, I'm very appreciative of your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Just to follow up, and I do see your hand, Barbara, I just want to quickly follow up on a couple of things that Sammy said. I appreciate the reminder about your earlier comment around synergy. It does seem like there's such a great opportunity to, if we've already indicated an interest, for example, in spending X amount of dollars on expanding our affordable housing programs, we get a bigger bang for the buck in terms of reaching other goals around climate action, if that's helping to weatherize homes and other things which support both affordability and our climate action goals. So I think just that general comment, I want to echo that Sammy suggested. Sammy, you asked about the Climate Council. I did just receive a draft of an MOU for the sort of rebirth of that council. So that is in process, and I'll let you know more about that as I can. And now, Barbara, you're next.
Great job, Laura. Yeah, so it is a lot of information, but you know, I can clearly follow it. And in my opinion, it's very user friendly. So I appreciate all your work here with this report. It looks fantastic. So thank you. I was looking. Are you going to talk any about the weatherization of the low-income homes? Are you going to talk about that? Do you have slides for that?
This was the only slide we had in the presentation for it.
And so I was looking at the difficulties in determining cost and implementation, as well as other considerations. And, you know, this is kind of, you know, this synergy that I've been hearing about tonight, and even before tonight. So I was wondering, I see all this information, but like what would be next steps? What would next steps look like? And just realizing that, you know, some folks may not want it, or do we, like it says here, set a realistic goal of 60% of homes initially in determined interest. So is that something that we might be interested in pursuing, and do we need to provide any kind of direction tonight? Or are we just like receiving the information for us to kind of digest and get back to Mr. White? Yes, to Mr. White.
Yeah, I think I will need to talk with Anne Marie about to answer your question.
Oh, okay.
Because I think she'll have probably better guidance than I can try to provide.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. So we'll just wait for that information. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Barbara. And I agree, Laura. This is a really nice way to have this information laid out for us, and something that we can use as a tool as we move forward in future budget cycles as well. Randy and then Danny.
Yeah, Laura, I love the way you did this data crunching and the entire layout. It's who you are. And I know you do a great job digging down deep. You bring great panache to the word nerd. What I wanted to ask about two things. One on the emission. And we know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of community. That's, what was it, 90%? It's like a huge number. What are the thoughts, or just the very global potential thoughts going forward on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing we're really close to launching is our Green Neighborhoods Grant Program, and I think that looking at what types of projects people propose for that program, as well as the potential emissions reductions with those, I think as that gains momentum, we're really hoping that can be a really big source of emissions reduction, and people getting ideas from their neighbors, and really starting to talk a lot more about what they can do, and getting ideas. And I think that there's also a lot of educational programs like our modules program that we can really push forward and align them with other initiatives. The climate action team at their last meeting was talking about how we could use our ecosystems module during pollinator week and use it as an educational tool. So I think education and giving people really easy ways they can reduce their emissions without having to change too much or spend too much money, I think that's going to be key. I think we really need to hone in on those, and like Sammy mentioned, ways where people can do the things that cost the least to reduce the most emissions. Transportation demand management is a big one on the community side of things. As you can see in the graph, transportation emissions increased from 2012 to 2019. So that, I think transportation is also something that we'll need to focus on.
Right. Is there any, are you keeping ahead of the potential for on microgrids? I know there's a lot of conversation happening around the state on microgrids. And I know on the transportation end of things, they're talking about more micro transit and transportation demand. But the microgrids is something that Carrboro has, has potential to pursue. And I don't know where the conversation is in terms of the state helping the municipalities to test that out, but I wanted to put that out there. In addition to community solar, that we know that we've been pushing over 20 years that we're talking about community solar, and what's the possibility of creating panels and arrays in our pocket parks and other areas in town. On the Green Neighborhood Initiative, which I'm very excited about, there are several neighborhoods that are poised and ready to be working more actively on their stormwater mitigation and erosion. We see that with the grant that the community has over in Bowling Forest. But in addition to that, there are 3 or 4 neighborhoods that are already enacting some kind of mitigation. What kind of either grants or funding can be given to assist them as they either dig deeper channels or bolster the swales, etc.? Because one of the key things that can help on the backs of the individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think the climate action team has expressed a lot of interest in helping push certain initiatives forward and get the word out, and also kind of let the town know what neighborhoods are doing. I think they've been a really good kind of conduit in between residents and the town, and I think I definitely would like to utilize climate action team members more to help us get information out to neighborhoods, and like you mentioned about potential funding sources that could be used to bolster their efforts, and our Green Neighborhoods Grant Program, which also could be used for initiatives that are already ongoing and might want to be expanded.
Right. So that if we know that there are 3 or 4, there's at least 4 I know neighborhoods that are engaged. Can during this next year, one of the things that the climate action team and you all do with stormwater people is sit down and meet with them and figure out, because we don't know what a budget could look like to help with mitigation. One neighborhood may need one thing, another neighborhood may need another. Still, someplace else they may have 2 or 3 homes that need something, and they can't afford it. And so it's going to be very specific. And I'd love to see that this next year we start to get that data and be able to say, okay, this is what it looks like here, neighborhood A and neighborhood B, it looks like this, and get a feel for what, because that's on the ground. And to me, one of the key points in getting neighborhood and community on board is having them do the work, sweat equity, so to speak, in their own neighborhood on stormwater mitigation. And they seem very much interested in doing it, but they can't always afford to do it. And even the HOAs need assistance in addition to the neighborhoods. So thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Next up is Danny.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and I just wanted to offer that slide 17, I love everything about it. I would really love if this could be a living document throughout the year that really becomes a project tracker. I know that you, for the purposes of this report, it's itemized exactly right for the level of fidelity we need tonight. But especially like transport, I'm looking at page 1 of the Excel. I could really take a tab out of each of these and just have like a project tracker attached to this. And that would be so enlightening to see that 4 times a year or something like that.
Okay, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. Well, Laura, you've gotten a lot of positive feedback about how useful it appears that this model is going to be for us and more importantly for you and the rest of the staff. So it sounds like you've gotten the guidance that you need. Am I right, Laura?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you very much.
And Mr. Manager, you agree you're fine?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. Great work. A couple of miscellaneous items. Susan had wanted to ask the manager a quick question about advisory boards in the budget. Before I get to you, Susan, I just want jumping us backward real quick to our previous discussion. Not looking to have further discussion. Just a quick clarification question for me, Mr. Manager. The reason that you're not recommending using ARPA funds to support the IFC request and the partnership expansion request is because of the whole complexity behind a subrecipient issue.
That's the main reason. I mean, those could be overcome, but it would be
Adds
a
administrative
complicated way to
cost.
do it, yes. But we could make that work as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just raised that as a question because we do have that money there. Now, if the administrative cost is such that it makes it not worth it to do it, or it ends up sinking more time into doing the work than actually spending the money on the things it needs to be spent on, then I'm not interested. But I just raised that question for some clarification, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you. Susan, you have a question about advisory boards.
Yes, Mr. Manager, this is to follow up on one of the questions I asked about the advisory board stipends, and I know that we've all been trying to recruit and especially recruit, bringing on more diversity to all of our advisory boards. So we had the conversation last year about offering stipends, and it sounds like that money actually never got into a program and got offered to people who were, this is through no fault of your own, but I guess it was, the details of the program never became known, so I don't think there were any advisory board members who actually made claims on stipends. Is that right?
Yes, that's my understanding. This was, I guess, a year ago or so, but the program was never developed and it wasn't approved by council, so there'd been no payment in terms of stipends.
So what I was going to suggest is I looked at the Chapel Hill does offer stipends for their advisory board members and it's for those who so choose. And I think you have to submit a voucher for this, but it would be for each hour sitting on an advisory board meeting, the member would receive $15.85, the living wage. And then they would also receive a half an hour to cover the time it takes to get to and from the meeting. I'm happy to share this in writing to you, Mr. Manager, if that should help. But I was going to suggest something along this lines. I know that it is, there's no guarantee that there will be funding available throughout the entire year. So we would basically figure out lump sum and then it would just last and then we could decide if we want to replenish it or not. But I know it would be, the idea is kind of making it available for lower income advisory board members, but technically anybody could claim it, is my understanding.
There's some interest in that, and Mr. Manager, I think we know that there are other models available too. I think OWASA has a particular model about how they compensate their board members for meeting attendance and that kind of thing. But thanks for sharing that, Susan. Eleazar?
Yes, thank you. I, similar to my comments, are going to be a response to your response to one of my questions around interpretation, simultaneous interpretation. If I understand your response correctly, you would need the council to give direction for staff to develop a formal strategy or stated commitment for simultaneous interpretation during meetings. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Cool. For council members, interpretation is for me key to ensuring that our community is aware and has the confidence to come in front of us. While I understand that there is already equipment that can be used for that simultaneous interpretation. There's currently no amount budgeted for it. And a huge part of us as a community seeking equity is ensuring that all members of our community can participate. So I would like some support in directing staff to create the before mentioned strategy and stated commitment to hiring professionals who can do this. In the past, I've, some instances we sometimes rely on members of the staff who do speak Spanish to do that service. I find that unfair, not just to the staff, but also the community member who is needing of that, because there is a lot that goes into interpretation. It's not simply saying something in Spanish and in English. There's a lot that goes into it. The words used, the way that it's expressed. So yeah, I would like some support from the council in directing this to staff.
Man.
Thanks, Eleazar. Mr. Manager, what kind of information would you need to start developing a program?
Yes, for both items, for the advisory boards and for this one, just a simple nod, if you will, of the majority of council to pursue both of those. Is
I'm happy with that. Yeah. I see nods. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Eleazar. Thanks, Susan. I think we're at the end of the work session. Mr. Manager, you have everything you need from us and in the form that you need it?
Yes, yes.
All right. Thanks very much. We're at the end of the agenda. Sammy, quick question.
Just quick matter by a member of the council. I would just shared with you all an email about falling through the cracks. There was a lot of deliberation on the part of the tab in regard to the Arts Center, and they didn't formalize their comments, and they didn't come to us. And I just want, perhaps Wesley, this is a task for you to come up with like a checklist for like development review and or courtesy review. There's a pretty different. One is addressed to the council, the other is addressed to a developer, so that they minimize their potential run-ins with wishes of this board and the community.
Sammy, can I ask you a question? So are you saying, it sounded, I read your email too kind of quickly. I didn't get a chance to read through it carefully. It sounded like what you were saying is that the Transportation Advisory Board, in reviewing that application, didn't understand or feel like they had an opportunity to provide comments on the application,
or just didn't understand that if they didn't formalize it, it wasn't going to be presented to us as a recommendation from that advisory
it seems
board.
like honestly, seems like a pretty straightforward thing to make sure our advisory boards, and maybe working through our council liaisons and our staff liaisons, that advisory boards understand that what they're doing when they review an application.
Yeah, but I think even for council liaisons, like when newcomers come on board, it wouldn't hurt to have this for both staff, council liaisons, and members of the advisory boards, just a checklist of what to go through when doing those kinds. And it wouldn't include too much. You're deliberating, and then a staff person is capturing this information, and then there's a vote.
Yeah, I think that's in general a good idea. I guess what I would say, instead of coming up with a solution, maybe the idea is we make sure staff and the manager and the clerk understand that we need to make sure our advisory boards have the tools they need to understand that if they need to get comments to us on an application, that they understand that's available to them.
And I strongly encourage looking at the checklist model, because in the medical community, starting in 2000, they started doing checklists and saved a lot of lives from just having little checklists.
We definitely want our advisory boards to feel like they have input. And that's something that maybe can come back to us as a report from staff if you develop something around that.
I have a comment.
Randy and then Barbara.
I was just going to say, Sammy, Trish, we had that on planning board decades ago. So there is a checklist so that folks knew what to expect. And there's also in the, I think as part of the academy, Citizens Academy, I think that was also another place that they showed steps under different circumstances. So if you check those two things.
Thanks, Randy. Barbara?
Thank you. As a council liaison for the Transportation Advisory Board, I believe that Zach's departure, and we've had other staff members filling in that are not transportation, they're not transportation planners and doing the best they can. So I'm not sure if this is just something that just kind of, got misunderstood or fell through the cracks. Because I think, Mr. White, you had reported that there was no recommendation, no formal recommendation from the TAB. Is that what,
On that particular project.
on that particular?
I don't
I
recall.
thought I saw that in an email. I'm sorry if that's not correct.
There's nothing from me, but
Yeah.
I
So it
didn't-
sounds like we have just questions from the council about making sure that the TAB and other advisory boards understand what their role is, and if there are tools that we need to develop to help them do that, their process, then that might be valuable as well, as Sammy suggested. And Barbara, thanks for reporting back on the TAB experience. It's helpful. Okay. Right.
Seconded.
Been moved by Sammy, seconded by Danny, that we adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Good night, everyone.
Also, to anyone responsible for these snacks, thank you so much.